present our AP World History presentation. And this one is about East Indian Company. This is actually the first multinational company. It's a private company, but have their own army, exercising state power. That is so important in the world history and also connected with our next project, which is Opium War. Now the audience is yours. Our job is to give you a hard time.
Okay, so the British East India Company sort of owned two countries, being India and America. It first started in the last day of 1600, where Queen Elizabeth I granted a royal charter to investors. And this was also the first joint stock company and limited liability corporation, which means that the investors don't lose more money than they had invested. And if the company goes down, they might get no money or like cents on the dollar, but they won't get like a negative money. So in 1608, it first docked at Surat, and it established what they called a factory, which was really a trading post at Machilpatnam, which is like on the coast of the Bay of Bengal. And in the 1600s and the earlier times, India was mainly ruled by the Mughals, which were, they were like from a foreign place. So like they also followed Islam, but like they still got along. So basically there, they got permission to trade with them. In 1667, the East India House was attacked by weavers and people that dyed fabric because a lot of the cloth was imported from Asia. So like these workers that were in England, they often like lost their jobs. And over there, they made it more cheaper. In 1684, they started trade with China. So over in England, or in the rest of Europe really, there was a high demand for porcelain, tea, and silk. And in exchange for that, they gave the Chinese silver. However, silver was obviously very expensive, so they started giving them opium, and that's like the start of the opium trade, which I will cover later. Then, of course, 1754 to 1763 was the French and Indian War, more commonly known as the 7 Years' War, where the French East India Company and the British East India Company and their allies were fighting each other for the territory, and of course the main goal for both companies was profit. And then 1773, the famous Boston Tea Party. Basically, colonists were protesting. Colonists were protesting the tea tax and also like taxation without representation. So they disguised themselves as Native Americans and through the tea. And then 1784 was the East India Company Act, which basically the countries had less control over India. And so on British imperialism in India. So of course the Queen granted the royal charter, and over time the company got like more exclusive control over India. It was very difficult for the British government itself to govern India because back then transportation, of course, it took a year to get there. And they got more trading control, which means they also got more military and administrative control. So they also had like a little government, a little army as well. They were almost like a country on their own. In the 1700s, India was made of 6 kingdoms, and they were constantly at war with each other. And each of the kingdoms, they traded with the East India Company, since the Europeans had better weapons. So by trading with the company, they'd have an advantage over the other kingdoms. The East India Company later also convinced local leaders to publicly promote trade. And they were paid a really nice salary. They got a lot of money. And also with that comes their family name as well. And if they did not promote the trade, well, they'd have to face the police force. And of course, there were other Indians that were happy to take their position and get the money and the honor that comes with it. The company had, like, at this time, India was like really unified. So the company had control over a lot of India, which also included like Pakistan. Okay, so they had an army of Indian sepoy, and they were commanded by British officers. During the 1800s, Europe had an industrial revolution, and so they could make fabric or weave fabric for a lower cost and more quickly. And this also put some Indians out of work. Like, even then, they were paid lower wages, of course, but they lost their jobs as well. Farmers were also made to switch from subsistence farming to cash crop. And it's a little mistake here. It didn't directly cause famine, but it definitely contributed to it. Because if the cash crop price went down a little bit, the village would be like totally in poverty. Then this like really wreaked havoc on the economy. The Indians got poorer and poorer, and it soon became more common for the British officials to see them as inferior, or maybe even treat them worse because of it. And the breaking point was at 1857. So the Indian troops were given rifles and that used the bullets, which were greased with pork and beef fat, which was of course offensive to Hinduism because they don't use beef meat, and offensive to Islam because they don't use pork meat. And so they rebelled, and the British government decided that the East India Company would no longer have the control that they did when the news of the Sepoy Rebellion came out. And soon, Queen Victoria was declared Empress in 1876, and she helped increase the amount of infrastructure in India, which sort of helped, but like as a whole, this company is a little controversial because they did sort of improve India with the infrastructure and better healthcare and stuff like that, but they also did it at the expense of the people. And back when the company was still in control, the Indians really didn't have much control over the situation, and they couldn't really speak out against them. Because the company's goal was to not govern the people or protect them, but it was just to make money, so they couldn't really do anything about it. Okay, so back to the opium trade. It was introduced around the 7th century by Arab traders, and like back then, they used it very sparingly, and they only used it for like pain relief, etc. But soon, tobacco smoking became popular in North America and around the world. And so people decided, well, if you can smoke tobacco, then why not opium? Of course, it became very addicting. And it drastically increased in the 1st century of the Qing dynasty. I'm really sorry for any mispronunciation. But like, of course, it was bad for the people because it weakened them and it was addictive. So the Yongzheng emperor outlawed the sale and smoking of opium. And then the Jia Qing outlawed opium cultivation and imports, and they thought it would help the people, but like really they didn't really have that much control over it. It was still coming in. And in 1773 the British became one of the leading sellers of opium, and soon they actually got a hold of the monopoly. The East India Company like traded this, as I mentioned earlier, to relieve the trade imbalance. Because giving silver as an exchange for tea, silk, and porcelain wasn't really a good idea because they became poorer. So by selling opium, they made some more profit. But because of the opium ban, the company didn't really carry the opium, but they sold it to like country traders. And so the traders would sell it to people that like smuggled it in. And then eventually opium addiction was like so widespread to the point that it affected like some, I guess, troops in China, and that led to the Opium Wars. So the first Opium War, it didn't legalize the trade of opium, but it did stop any Chinese efforts to stop it. But in the Second Opium War, it actually did legalize the trade. In 1906, however, the amount of opium began to decline, since the Chinese did eventually gain control of it, and they signed a 10 years agreement with India. So basically, the Chinese, they would make an effort to like reduce the amount of opium, but India had to like proportionally reduce the amount of production of the opium. And in 1917, opium was like almost gone, and maybe several years later. Because of the communist government, it was completely gone. And that's my presentation.
Wonderful. It's above my expectation, right? Do you agree? So can you live up the same standard? Okay, later on. Now, your job is to give her 3 at least hard questions. Give her a hard time.
I
That's
don't
your
know
job.
if they're hard questions, but at one point when you were talking about the, what was it, what was it? Sepoy, yeah. Okay.
The Indian uprising, right?
Yeah.
Uprising.
It was. You also said that at one point the British, the East India Company traded weapons with the different kingdoms in India, and you mentioned that each one would have an advantage over the other. Are you saying that they sell certain weapons to each kingdom because
like basically the weapons of the Europeans were like more technologically innovative and just better. So if a kingdom first say did not trade with the company, they'd have worse weapons and they'd ultimately lose.
Yeah. That's actually almost answer one of my questions. Why there are so little people belong to the East Indian Company, and even later on after uprising, when the Queen took over, still the number of British physically located in India are very small, but they control a very rich and diverse continent because they were very competitive with a different language, religious competition. They were actually fighting a kind of civil war continuously, right?
Yeah.
So that's why the British can take over relatively very easily. Here is any other question? That's a good one. Okay, now I gave you some hard questions. I actually asked you before. The first stater is a charter granted by the Queen. Do you know how much percentage the Queen, before the Queen take over as the Queen of India too, right? I mean, the British government taking over India, it was actually belonged to British East Indian Company. How much share the Queen had?
I don't know.
And who is actually the owner, the board of director, which social class, ethnicity, this owner of the company belong? Because it's a private company, and the private company have owner. Who are the owners?
I really don't know. Maybe it's the people that have the stocks in it.
Yeah,
So
but who are they? Are they British? Are they Scottish? Are they Wales? Are they aristocrats? Are they bourgeoisie? Are they bankers? Are they international bankers? Is there any investor out of Britain? We need to research that together.
Yeah.
And who are they? And you also talk about the opium was from Arab traders.
Yeah.
Originally, which is true, which is totally true. And gradually, is there any Middle Eastern connection into this? And also, that's the further study. We will study them together, okay? Because then we can talk about Mongol Empire, you talk about, okay? The British contract with Mongol Empire. Why the Mongol Empire doesn't do that? And who are the Mongol Empire? And you will tell us something about Mongol Empire. And being a minority, a Muslim minority, they were originally from Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
From Afghanistan with a
Or
Persian.
somewhere near Iran.
Yeah, Iran area. And they were the descendants of Genghis Khan, the Mongols. That's why the Mongols, right? They were the Mongols, but they have a Persian culture. And they were from Afghanistan. They invade India and become the owner. How much the Indian population identified with the Mongol Empire, how much they don't. And the local small kingdoms, what's the relationship with the Mongol Empire? Because the Mongol Empire didn't control all India, right? They control majority of it. What's the incentive for each prince to have contract with British East Indian Company? Because after all, they have a small army, but they are very good traders, and they study local language and culture and religion. That's the strong point. They study everything. The British at that time have the best in terms of anthropology, the best study of local cultures, and how much that contribute to the so-called expansion, I won't say success, of East Indian Company. They were super rich. And they are the predecessors of the so-called the other multinational company like BP, British Petroleum, which is originally in Burma, which was part of India, part of a British India. Yeah, they were the border area because British India said, we want to protect India from the invasion, so they acquire Burma. And through Burma, they start a BP, which is British Petroleum Company. Of course, later on, they get more money from Persia, which is Iran. See, that is predecessor of all these major companies, a lot of them in Houston. So it's very important to study the company management. They call it the company management structure. So it's very interesting. There's a lot of things to dig. So if it happens later on, they have an AP essay on this, you will have A. Okay, so give me as much input as possible on Mongol Empire and the process. Give me some more detail.
Oh, I don't really know much about the Mongol Empire, but I think, were they like, instead of like hunter-gatherers or like use agriculture, they were like, their form of food was like to cattle and stuff like that. Like
they were nomads. There were nomads
yeah.
people. There was nomads. They're not hunter-gatherers. They're not that primitive. Actually, when the descendants of the Mongol people from Mongolia, they invaded Afghanistan, and then which is in the Persian culture, and then they convert to Islam. Okay, so they have a kind of architecture, like Taj Mahal, are very similar, like the the Central Asian architecture. So they bring architecture in, but being the nomad people, they are very effective warriors. So they can use a small group of people to conquer big territory. I think the British one success is they manipulated the difference between language, religion, and the local people's resignment towards the regime.
Yeah, it was kind of like a divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer. So it's very divide and conquer. So tell me more about the uprising and why after uprising, the soldiers uprising, why they failed.
Okay, so the Sepoy uprising was kind of the start of the resentment, and up till that point, the East India Company had good control over India, a good amount of land, everything.
Very
but
good.
after that uprising, they like lost their control. The citizens like obviously had resentment, and I think there was an Indian legislative body towards the end of the 19th century.
Yes.
And they wanted to negotiate with the British, but like soon they asked them like, can we like have power over our land too? And they told them no. So that's when they started like trying to get independent from England.
That's a good answer. Any other question? Especially the ones related with the Opium War. You should have some question to enrich your projects.
So you said the control in China, like the control of the opium, it kind of backfired.
Which point was it?
Which part?
It's not a bullet, but you said at one point that when the Chinese government was trying to control the import of opium, it backfired because they were still illegally importing it.
Yeah.
That means not successfully enforce the law because Beijing government is in Beijing, and a lot of Chinese view them as northern barbarians. The southern Chinese has always been resent to the Manchu control of the whole Chinese nation. And the business people in Guangdong province, near Hong Kong area, here's Beijing, That's thousands of miles away. There's no modern communication. And the people who control China at that time are also nomads from Manchuria, people on horseback. Even though they control the country for several hundred years, people still hate them. People still hate them. So when they send officers to enforce the rule, local business people like these Indian business people, they want to enrich themselves. There's no enforcement. Okay? So there's a lot of cooperation between the Chinese and the British to smuggle opiums in because it's highly profitable. Okay? It's highly profitable. And of course, there's a secret society involved. Anti-government secret society. They control drugs. They are very effective. So very rich business people and secret society work together, make the government enforcement very hard. Okay? So that is why she said very well. I was surprised. British don't directly, legally, they don't directly sell to the Chinese. They say, oh, we didn't do anything wrong. In the small islands, they download their cargo to the Chinese merchants. And it is the Chinese officers is corruption. Corrupt officers and the Chinese business people smuggle them in. And it's a major business. Okay, that's why what she's talking about, these local princelings compete with each other to trade with the company. So the company legally, they have good lawyers too. Legally, we didn't do anything wrong. And the British even surprised themselves. We didn't even have a plan to take over India. We want to do business, and the whole big continent fell to our plate by default. Fell to our control by default. We don't have a grand plan to take over countries, don't. We want to do business. But they have technology, they have banking, they have local knowledge. The knowledge of different culture, and they negotiate with different princelings. Okay, so, and gave them, you said very well, they gave them honorary titles, gave them privilege, and they practice what? Indirect control. They don't have direct control like the Russians do. Russians will take over and massacre all the local people and take over the territory and have the Cossacks to control the whole territory and make it become Russia. Okay? So, and the British don't have that much people. Okay? And one more question, not directly connected with this. Hey, think about the British people. London is compared with India in terms of climates are very different. How these people adjust to the local climates, and how do they deal with malaria, which you guys want to become a doctor. How the British officers and the soldiers and the business people deal with the climate, food, culture. Go ahead if you know something.
I don't know about the how they dealt with the climate and the food and the adjusting with the cultures, but I think they took care of the malaria problem with tonic.
Yeah, tone and tonic. So when I've been to South Carolina, they have the British party, and the drink have gin and tonic. It's become not upper class, higher middle class in the professors, they drink gin and tonic. And they get that from Indian officers club. The first is for health, right? So they put tonic with quinine. Quinine is a tree, and they use the bark of the quinine and put into the water that is tonic water. So they pour that with alcohol. It's a socialization. And of course, this officers club, only the rich and the powerful Indians can join. That is an exclusive social club, but they involve some Indians. And these are people, they make bondings, help them to control India. So this very tricky hierarchical society. We accept only small tip of the Indian society. So you work for us. and I make you very profitable. And even some people adjust the dress, manners, and stuff like that. That's good. That's very good. Okay. The Indian food and the British food are very different. Oh, you didn't mention anything about spice. Spice. Because these people need two things. Silk from China, spice from India. Of course, later on there is tea. Tea, personally, you mentioned, right? Spice. Why spice are so important for the Europeans, especially the British? It's important for the British East Indian Company. Why?
Because there was a high demand for it.
Why?
Those spices didn't grow in Europe, so they could like farm the spices over there, basically.
That's right.
And just like a variety in food, obviously.
And there are some other elements. Because the British and European people through crusade, they learned a lot about Middle Eastern culture. And compare at least with the food, they were far more inferior. Even right now, the British food is not highly priced, in the world market, right? They are even right now, they're very primitive. So, there's a joke we talk about that in India. In London, most of the people are from Central, is from subcontinent, right? Pakistanis and Indians. And they say, we have so little British people, and why you occupy our place? If we go, who will feed you? So a lot of British already addicted to the Indian food. Why is that? Because the meat processing in Europe are so primitive. And they don't have refrigerator, they just use a lot of salt. So with the spice, they can preserve food with a longer, especially in international trade. On the ship, they need spice. So spice is a status symbol. Silk, porcelain, and then later on tea and high tea, right?
And textiles as well.
Yeah, textile. Yes, textile. There was one textile called muslin. Still right now. It's a Middle Eastern pattern, and a lot of them are connected. Indian, Persian are very connected. Even some patterns are very similar, right? A lot of Indian
Like
textile,
embroidery.
embroidery. That's a status symbol in Europe. So they are trading very expensive item once they can ship these things into Europe. So that company is highly profitable. That's why I want you to study who owned them. Because the money stay in the extended family. A lot of trading company, trading bank, like a Jiading family, okay? They are originally actually from Middle East. And then they get British citizenship. Okay. They were the Jewish people being kicked out from Spain, and then they get into the Ottoman Empire, and then they have to trade in the Middle East. And they know the trading road between the Middle East and India. That's where opium comes from. Okay? From the 7th century, it's already used in medicine. In the Chinese medicine, in the Arab medicine. Okay? So that's another legalistic reason the British argue with the Chinese. Hey, it's illegal for you, but it's legal for us. It's your fault your people get addicted, and we didn't even sell directly to you. Okay? Many years ago, when I was a youth, they used the same thing to sell cigarettes to Chinese market too. So they set up subsidiary in Singapore, and these Singaporean Chinese get the British Kent, K-E-N-T, and the American cigarette. And because they want to avoid, of course, cigarette is illegal, but they want to avoid the very high tariffs. Because once you import them legally, government have most of the money, right? But if you sell them indirectly to Singapore, And they set up in some small island near China, and some Chinese business people ship them the whole shipload to China, make them highly profitable. So that's the tested technique they were using middle company. That's number one. Number two, they were using the computation between the different political entities within the company. That's how they were so successful. Think about it as a private company. Okay, the challenge is later on, if you want to study business, who owned the bank? And a lot of international banking, think about a lot of cash involved, tons of cash involved. For that reason, bank was set up. And some of them are important names of bank. But I applaud your presentation. It's wonderful. Yeah. Anything additional question? Good. We finished. Thank you.